Greetings, participants. We're just going to show a short video before we start the webinar. Thanks for your patience. Thanks very much.
Gazing upon our world from a distance, it appears peaceful and calm. But the reality is far different. The repercussions of climate change are approaching us all, and we all contribute to this impact. By 2050, projections indicate that over 3 billion people will reside in various urban centers in the Asia-Pacific region alone. Urban activities are a key contributor to climate change. Cities are responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions, with transport and buildings among the most significant contributors. And since 2012, the Asia-Pacific region has collectively been responsible for more than half of global greenhouse gas emissions yearly. The repercussions of climate change are imminent and befalling us all. Several Asian countries are among the top 10 countries most affected by climate change, with the Philippines ranked the 4th, India ranked the 7th, and Thailand ranked the 9th. It's time to act, and we have a joint responsibility to address climate change through urban development planning and design guided by climate data. That's where Urban Act comes in. Urban Act, or the Integrated Urban Climate Action for Low Carbon and Resilient Cities project, is a regional project that aims to support the transformation towards low carbon and resilient urban development and contribute to implementing each partner country's nationally determined contributions and the Sustainable Development Goals. Funded by the International Climate Initiative, or ICI, commissioned by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, or BMWK, Urban Act is implemented in 5 partner countries: China, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand, with a duration spanning 5 years from 2022 to 2027. We aim to achieve 4 critical outputs. These outputs include improving the institutional environment for climate-sensitive urban development, using evidence-based, inclusive, climate-sensitive, spatial and urban planning, identifying project concepts for urban climate action investment, and enhancing knowledge through regional networking, exchange, and learning. Our collaborative partnership comprises the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit GmbH, or GIZ, as a project leader, and the international partners consisting of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ESCAP, United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific, or UCLG ASPAC, the University of Stuttgart, and TU Dortmund University, and national partners in each of the project countries. To promote and showcase a sustainable integration of climate change into urban development, Urban Act implements its support in 14 pilot cities across the 5 countries, recognizing the unique context of the partner countries and aiming to improve the country's specific policies and regulatory frameworks. Furthermore, we engage in joint operations with the Indonesia-Malaysia-Thailand Growth Triangle, or IMTGT, implementing initiatives in 6 cities within the IMTGT sub-region. We are all standing on the edge, and every decision and action we take today will shape our future for generations to come. It is not just a choice, it's a collective responsibility that falls on each of our shoulders. It's time for us to unite and journey towards low-carbon, resilient urban development. Join us in the Urban Act, Joint Action for Climate-Friendly and Resilient Cities. We are stronger if we are together.
very warm welcome participants to this Climate Conscious Cities webinar series webinar, project preparation for climate action, what are donors looking for from cities and what do cities need, the 9th Urban Act webinar of this year. My name is Clinton Moore, Urban Climate Change Specialist at United Nations ESCAP. It's a pleasure to be your moderator today. I'm delighted that we've received more than 300 registrations from Asia and the Pacific and beyond, showing the keen interest in the topic. The webinar series is part of the Urban Act project funded by the International Climate Initiative, Germany. We hope through the webinar series to increase the understanding and knowledge of participants to build integrated climate action for low carbon and resilient cities and build and enhance partnerships both within the Urban Act project and beyond. As participants would have noted, you were asked questions about what you would like to learn and hear about in the webinar during your registration. So thank you to all that responded and put in some great questions. Some housekeeping remarks before we hear from our three distinguished speakers. Please note that these webinars are recorded and available to view following the session with slides on YouTube. Please feel free to use the chat box during the webinar to interact with other participants, but please use the Q&A function also to write questions to the panelists, and we will do a mixture of answering those questions verbal live on the webinar and also in writing if the panelists are able to have the chance. We're also pleased to say that you can get a certificate of participation by filling in the survey feedback form. With the introductions and introductory remarks aside, let's get on with the show, shall we? So we know that cities across the Asia Pacific increasingly require the know-how and capacity to access climate finance and investment to enact projects for low carbon and climate resilient urban development. So how can cities enhance their capacity to develop flexible and bankable climate action projects? And how can they best be supported by project preparation facilities and their partners, such as the C40 Cities Climate Finance Facility that we'll be speaking today? So it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first speaker of today's webinar, Mr. Francisco Macedo. And Francisco is a senior associate at the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance of the Climate Policy Initiative. Francisco leads different work streams of CCFLA. He's responsible for the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment Program, or LUCI, the framework for concrete collaboration between champion initiatives of CCFLA members. He also oversees the Local Hubs program, which aims to capitalise on CCFLA's membership to support the development of solutions to address barriers for urban climate investment in different countries and regions. Francisco, thank you very much to you and the CCFLA team for joining us once again. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Clinton. It's my pleasure to be here with you today and with Hayo and our distinguished audience. So looking very forward to the discussions. Clinton, should I share my slides or should... perfect, you got them. Brilliant. So next slide, please. So CCFLA, right? We're starting with this acronym, probably the longest in the room, although we have some good contestants today. But CCFLA really stands for Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which was launched in 2014. So we're celebrating our anniversary, our birthday this year. Actually, 10 years celebrating this week because it was launched during New York Climate Week. And since we started in 2014, CCFLA has really become this place of partnerships. So we are the multi-level and multi-stakeholder coalition of a wide range of institutions that are committed to increasing investment in urban climate projects worldwide. And this is really how we became strong with this ambition of really working the global urban climate finance gap. Next slide, please. So when we talk about this platform for collaboration, we're talking about 84 different institutions that we are very closely working with, and span from institutions quite active on the demand side, so working very hand in hand with cities like city networks and local city networks. I guess you know many of them already, but also supply side, so working very hand in hand with the MDBs, private sector, climate funds, national governments, and also the enablers. And I think we'll be talking a lot about enabling environment today, so it brings good pleasure to say that we have a lot of enablers that are working with us, institutions that are helping think how we can drive urban climate investments worldwide, but also United Nations bodies, participation facilities, and other institutions very focused on particular sectors. Next slide, please. Fantastic. So let's dive into the main topic of today's discussion, which is project preparation and the role of participation facilities. So as all of you know, especially those working with cities, that developing projects that can become bankable, that is, that can readily mobilize investment, is not an easy task. It requires a lot of capacity, a lot of financial management systems, a lot of knowledge of climate change, technical studies, a lot of data as well. Sometimes you also need even the right regulations that will allow you to develop these projects. And project preparation facilities are really to be your best friends in this process. So PPFs, the project preparation facilities, are really the institutions that are supporting cities during all different stages that they go through in order to develop urban climate infrastructure projects. So basically they work from the very beginning, so the local level, helping the city develop their climate strategy, all the way to going from this broad strategy to very specific project concepts, and helping do all the studies, pre-feasibility, feasibility, so that you can finally go to the structuring and transaction of that investment and build that much needed infrastructure to mitigate climate change, so to cut emissions, but also to adapt to the impact of floods and heats that I think we are seeing everywhere this year. Next slide, please. So we did this study a couple of years ago where we tried to understand a bit more in depth what really are the preparation facilities. So trying to understand, like how they are structured, what are the different geographies they're working with, the sectors, the kind of support they provide. And basically in this study, we analyzed around 80 different PPFs, and we have been able to collect a lot of information about around 30 of them. And then what we did was to try to analyze this landscape of PPFs according to all these different dimensions. So now I'll run you through a couple of insights that we had from this research. So next slide, please. So the first things first, we see that the most common support that PPFs are providing are the technical assistance that is needed to develop the project concept, the pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, but also providing grants. So that means providing the finance, which much times is needed to really do these studies. So they are really supporting with this earlier part, let's say, of the preparation cycle. Next slide, please. Then again, we see that we have a lot of PPFs that are working on different parts of the preparation. So we have quite many that are working early stage, especially with helping governments build the climate plans, but also helping them scope what could be the infrastructure, the interventions that will allow them to reach their climate objectives. And then we have a bit less so and so as we move forward to pre-feasibility, feasibility, and finally to implementation. So basically, there are a bit less institutions that are helping really link these projects to finance, but a lot of them helping projects to be developed, to be thought, to be considered, and to be aligned with the climate strategy. Something that is not in this slide, but I think is quite interesting, that we see that there are many PPFs that are doing the full service, which is quite interesting because as you're looking for a partner, it's good to be looking for a partner that can help you with the different stages of your preparation cycle. So a lot of them are doing all the different steps with the cities. Next slide, please. Fantastic. Then looking at by sector, we can see that almost half of them support all sectors, but especially there are quite a lot that are working with water, sanitation, waste, transportation, mobility, renewable energy, green public spaces, and adaptation resilience. And here, I would really love to hear your thoughts if this also resonates with your experience working PPFs. So asking this question also to participants, and happy to read the chat later to see if your understanding resonates with our findings. And the next slide, please. So here I'd like to invite you to go to our website where you can go through resources, and by clicking on resources, you can go to our participation facility directory, which I'll drop the link in the chat. But basically, it's a tool that we developed, CCFLA, that helps different cities understand what is the right PPF for their specific needs. So you can search the different PPFs, so the institution helping cities develop their projects by different sectors, by different geographies, by different kind of support. And by basically doing that, you're able to understand who will be your perfect match for this support. And I'd like to stop here and looking very forward to the continuing of the discussions. So thank you very much, Clinton. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. I think that gives a really excellent overview of the sort of state of play in terms of project preparation facilities and how cities, what they're looking for, and how cities can be connected with the right PPF for their needs. I am delighted now to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Hayo Junge, Co-Director GIZ of the C40 Cities Finance Facility, excuse me. Hayo has worked in the field of development cooperation for over 20 years with a strong focus on governance, urban development, and infrastructure investments for over 20 years, including experience in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Hayo, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the floor for your presentation on behalf of the C40 Cities Finance Facility. Over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Clinton. Very happy to be here with all of you today, especially with Francisco and with Joyce. Good evening to the Pacific. Good afternoon to Asia. Good morning to Africa and Europe. And I believe maybe some of you are in the Americas as well. So good night, I guess. Maybe some of you are at the New York Climate Week. So incredible that over 300 participants are here. So extremely happy to be able to share some insights from CFF as well. So maybe the next slide. And we might jump to the next one already. So as Francisco mentioned, PPFs play a critical role, and I'm really happy to share some PPF experiences, since we as the C40 Cities Finance Facility are considered as a PPF. We are also a global initiative on urban infrastructure finance and investment, but our core USP is actually being a PPF and providing relevant support to cities in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. What we have been able to do since 2015, so in 2015, CFF was established to mobilize $650 million for urban infrastructure related investment. And we project that by next year already, we will have mobilized $1 billion USD. So that's quite nice. And we have been considered as a leading infrastructure initiative within the framework of the PGII of G7, and yeah, we had the honor to receive a UNFCCC Global Climate Action Award in 2020 as well. Currently, we have funding partners from various G7 donors, so namely UK, FCDO, USAID, the French AFD, and German BMZ. And we are just concluding our current funding phase end of October. We are going into a new funding phase 1st of November, and I will come back to that one a little bit later. Next slide, please. So key pillars of CFF support, financial readiness linked to finance and upscaling. I think that's interesting for our today's conversation as well. So we do work towards finance readiness, both for the project and the implementing institution and city administration. So we actually enter into a very concrete, detailed partnership with a city on the basis of their investment-related proposals. And then we support the city in political processes and the negotiations with financial institutions to be able to access the finance as well. And being a global initiative as well, we work with various partners, CCFLA, Urban Act, Covenant of Mayors Sub-Saharan Africa, ICLE, through our C40 network, obviously through the GIZ network, and we actually share our experiences and knowledge quite extensively as well through various networks and partners under the upscaling component. Next slide, please. So that's our typical infrastructure investment project cycle. We link infrastructure projects to finance and provide cities ongoing support and expertise they need. So we don't have the investment funding in our support package, but we do everything actually to support cities to be able to access finance from financiers. So our starting point is that we require projects to reach project scoping phase. That's kind of the entry point where CFF would enter and provide support on technical assistance, business case development, financial structuring, and financial option assessments. So that's why we differ a little bit. We tend to call ourselves a late stage PPF. We don't actually start with identifying projects or scoping or planning. That's why we actually also right now very much like to work with initiatives like the City Climate Finance Gap Fund or Urban Act or others, actually to build on their support as well, working on matchmaking. And then we aim for projects to reach at least financial readiness, or some people call it bankability as well. We tend to call it financial readiness. For high quality project preparation is a prerequisite to create and demonstrate an attractive risk return profile. So we really need well-developed projects already for us to be able to provide the support. And then it's really up to the end, kind of making sure that there will be a financier available. And here on the left bottom corner, you see financial agreements, feasibility studies, of course, feasibility studies first, and then financial agreements. So we really provide dedicated support for a city actually to reach kind of agreement with potential financiers. And as I said, we don't have the investment funds in our support package, but yeah, as I said earlier, the great majority of our projects are actually being funded at the end. Next slide, please. So we connect cities to the finance instrument most suited to them. So it's quite flexible. We have an open approach to funding. Up to now, big majority actually comes from public funds. It can be city budget, it can be state budget, it can be national budget, or also budgets from multilateral development banks. National development banks are actually showing great interest to closely work with us. Then we have private funding up to 50 million USD, very much for mobility, transport, renewable energy related projects, and then blended finance as well. Just to give you an example, the bike sharing system in Bogota, there was actually the private operator who did the investment at the end of the day. The renewable energy in Curitiba in Brazil was financed from the city budget itself. In Jakarta, there was a PPP arrangement to invest in the e-bus fleet in eThekwini, Durban in South Africa around the adaptation project. There was blended finance, 90% public and 10% private. And in Monterrey, Mexico, electrifying the BRT corridors, it was also a blended finance model. So we are very open at the beginning, and then we really try to see with the city what the best financing instrument could be. We're also having a lot of conversations with, as I said, national development banks now and MDBs, whether CFF could provide valuable support for their pipelining as well, but they also have the dedicated PPF support, obviously, in their own PFS and feasibility stages. Next slide, please. So we are working quite broadly, working across different sectors and geography. As I said, right now we have a mandate to support cities in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. Sectors we have covered: energy, mobility, waste, adaptation related projects. Until now, we have kind of 70% of our projects have a mitigation focus, 30% have an adaptation focus, but we are actually aiming at a 50-50 shift going into our next phase starting in November, I said. So also our international funders actually show a greater interest in adaptation, resilience related projects, including nature-based solution. It's really becoming a bigger priority, which we see now. And yeah, just to give you some examples here: Salvador de Bahia in Brazil on adaptation, Cape Town, South Africa on adaptation, Drakenstein also on adaptation, KL on adaptation, Medellin in Colombia on adaptation. Then we have one very exciting waste project in Accra, Ghana, a lot of energy projects also in KL again, and Bogota, Jakarta, Cape Town, Mumbai, Dhaka. And then, mobility, transport related in Lima, Trujillo, Rio de Janeiro, Freetown, Johannesburg, Bombela, South Africa as well. So quite diverse. We're extremely excited, of course, about the different mobility alternatives. So the cycling projects which we have supported in the past are extremely exciting. But also the cable car project in Freetown, Sierra Leone is extremely exciting because we see a great potential actually for cable car related mobility approaches and concepts in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also beyond. Next slide, please. So steps towards financial readiness. So under financial readiness, of course, we do support financial and technical feasibility studies. Then we conduct a market study. We develop a business case. Then, of course, the legal study is quite an important prerequisite. Project structuring and risk assessment, that's kind of what is required then also by the potential financiers. Under Link to Finance, we support financial outreach, also to identify potential possible financiers and investors, the financial structuring, preparing procurement documents or other contracts. That's really not to be underestimated, also within the framework of PPP, as most of you know here. Of course, the devil is in the detail, and that's really critical. And upscaling, as I mentioned, we try to inform wherever it makes sense, national policies and programs. Good example in the case of Brazil now with a new priority program on green and resilient cities. We are able to feed in quite good experiences from CFF into that process as well. And of course, national and regional replication. We have knowledge sharing events within the C40 network, but also beyond. And of course, there is good potential for in-city upscaling as well. And throughout, that's actually, that's why we are not only providing the Link to Finance, but the capacity development runs throughout our support. Next slide, please. So under capacity development, of course, we look at the individual skills of the people who are actually involved in the process. So city staff, politicians, administrative staff members. Then looking at the organizational performance overall of a city or whoever is involved, and then obviously inter-organizational cooperation is quite critical as well, especially when it comes to Link to Finance, working with states, working with national government, and working with the various stakeholders actually who needs to get involved. So yeah, capacity development is very critical. We're also just happy that we entered into a partnership with the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, specifically dedicated on capacity development. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some components of capacity development include gap assessments, capacity assessments, and learning and training plans. I don't want to go into detail because I'm wary of time. Next slide, please. And that's interesting for our today's conversation as well, maybe a little bit CFF city selection criteria. So we are actually entering into a new city selection process end of this year, early next year. In our eligibility screening, we look at the project majority. As I said, we are rather a later stage PPF. We look for tangible infrastructure project proposals. The completeness of an application, of course, is key. Differentiation from previous CFF projects, so our donors have a very close eye on what we have supported in the past and what we are planning to support in the future. So they would like to, they're looking for new things as well. And then we are able to work in ODA eligible countries. Yeah, of course, that's relevant for the funders of the CFF specifically. For our prioritization, the climate benefit is key, developmental and inclusivity benefits, so equity and inclusion, fighting inequality is a key component. Of course, the city context and the project scale is relevant. The potential for upscaling, we look at institutional and absorption capacity of a city, of course, is also important. And we also look at the overall risks to implementation. So at the end, of course, we do aim that the project is being linked to finance. That's why the risk assessment is also quite critical. Thank you. Next slide, please. I invite you to become a future partner. Not saying that we are able to provide support directly, but as I mentioned already, next slide, please. We are actually entering into our next funding cycle. So the next funding phase of CFF starts in November 2024, running until December 2027, possibly until December 2028. But we will open our application window December this year, January next year, and then we look forward to applications and proposals from cities across the Global South. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Hayo. And I'm sure there's a lot of audience members, indeed cities, listening there thinking how they can potentially access the expertise and resources of the C40 Cities Finance Facility. Looking forward to having you in the discussion later. It is now my pleasure to welcome our city expert speaker, Joyce C., who is a planning officer in the Urban Development Department at the City Government of Makati in the Philippines, which is a part of Metro Manila. Joyce is a registered social worker with more than 15 years of experience in urban planning in the Philippines. She's a graduate of sociology at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, and later on took on social work and Masters of Social Work programs. Currently at Makati, Joyce is working on various programs, social services, social protection, disaster risk reduction and management, climate change adaptation, green financing, and smart cities. That's quite the portfolio there, Joyce. So we very much are glad that you are here today as our city expert, and the floor is very welcome to you, Joyce. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mabuhay, everyone. I'm Joyce from the City Government of Makati, and over the next 10 minutes, I will be sharing Makati's resiliency story, and I hope you'll find valuable examples to learn from. Next slide, please. Okay, so Makati City is known as the financial and business capital of the Philippines, so it plays a huge role in driving the nation's economy. So you can imagine the ripple effect it would have if a disaster hits Makati. It would impact not only the city and the neighboring cities, but the entire country. That's why building resilience and climate change adaptation is a top priority for us. With that context, let's consider a few questions, key questions, for example, from cities, and what do cities need to effectively prepare climate action projects to build resilience? Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so let's begin by addressing what investors expect when entering a collaboration. Based on our experience in Makati, there are three key elements they look for in our proposal. Most of them were actually mentioned already by the two previous special experts. One is to have a clear goal. This needs to be well-defined and aligned, not only with their corporate objectives, but also with global targets like the Sustainable Development Goals. Second, it should be bankable projects. At the core, the donors and the investors are still looking into business viability. They expect projects that are financially sound and demonstrate clear returns. Then the third one is co-benefits and innovation. Increasingly, donors and investors prioritize projects that incorporate resilience and climate impact. This is becoming a significant trend, especially in institutions like the Asian Development Bank, which now integrates climate and resilience into their programs. Okay, meeting this expectation not only strengthens proposal, but also foster long-term partnerships for impactful climate solution. These also address how local governments in the Philippines leverage from innovative financing mechanisms by aligning and applying layers of lenses to their projects to include sustainability goals, enhancing transparency, and building investors' confidence. So no need to actually prepare new projects or new programs, but actually looking to these projects into different lenses would actually come up with what the investors and donors are actually looking for. So while green bonds raise capital for climate resilience, infrastructure, and PPPs share risk and resources with private partners. However, for LGUs that are actually just starting up, the first step is to actually have a clear climate goal and then build your data, because that's they actually needed always the historical data for loss and damage especially. In Makati's case, before Mayor Binay declared a climate emergency and call for action in 2022, we conducted several needs assessment that included all our stakeholders as we embrace a whole of society approach. This approach involves engaging all stakeholders, including the vulnerable sector, academia, and the business sector, as demonstrated in our local tactic and our localized target on reducing our GHG emission to 39% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Next slide, please. So having explored what donors and investors expect, let's shift our focus on what the cities and local governments need from them. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Yes, so capacity building and knowledge sharing. As cities increase, adopt innovative technologies for climate action, local governments are keen to upskill their personnel. So many cities, especially in the developing regions, struggle with acquiring the expertise needed to complex climate projects preparation. So they need support in areas such as financial structuring, risk assessment, and even the monitoring and evaluation to enable more effective sustainable projects. Simplified access to funds, so it's very important. The complexity and length of preparing funding proposal creates significant barriers, particularly for local governments with limited access to external financing. So many cities face challenges in securing climate funds like the Green Climate Fund, emphasizing the need for streamlined application processes and assistance with pre-feasibility studies. Additionally, flexible funding mechanisms are essential as project needs evolve over time. So the third one is long-term commitment. Climate actions and resiliency building require sustained efforts, and cities needs ongoing financial support rather than one-off grants. So long-term commitment from donors and investors are vital to ensure the continuity and success of projects. So this sustained support fosters stability, trust, and deeper collaboration between cities and their partners. So for Makati's active global engagement has earned its recognition as one of UNDRR's resilience hub and secure Mayor Abby's participation in high-level advisory groups such as the COP28 and the UN Secretary General's Local and Regional Government Advisory Group, contributing to the ongoing Summit for the Future, which is the New York Climate Week right now. This visibility has positioned Makati to assist other local governments in the Philippines and in the region by facilitating networking opportunities, advocating for projects, securing funding for climate and resilience initiatives, and amplifying the voice of local governments in the global stage. We also explore the potential for Makati to serve as a central hub for local governments seeking collaboration with international partners. Currently, we offer technical and financial assistance to our sister cities, particularly in disaster recovery efforts. Additionally, they can request capacity building support and engage in best practices engage with us anytime. So they just need to send in their request for that one. Next slide. So having explored the needs of cities and expectation of the investors, we'll now focus on one financing option that effectively bridges these two aspects, which is the public-private partnership. This approach highlights how Makati can finance and implement climate resilience projects in collaboration with international partners. So Makati has access to financial resources. It was actually dubbed one of the richest cities in the Philippines. So we're not priority in terms of financial assistance and grants, even from the local government, from the national government and the international organizations. So in some cases, such as the People Survival Fund, the city is not even eligible to access it. So recognizing this limitation, the city government actively pursue innovative solutions, leveraging the strength of our robust public sector. We forge partnership with them. So the primary objective of pursuing PPPs in the city is to enhance service delivery by providing improved cost-efficient and timely services while maximizing cities' assets that may not typically be financially viable. By facilitating risk sharing between the public and private sector, PPPs empower local government to undertake projects that were previously out of reach. For example, is the Makati subway that we are actually still pursuing. So when evaluating a PPP for project financing, the city government consider several key factors, including project objectives, cost, and risk. Ensuring compliance with relevant laws, promoting fairness and transparency, and clearly delineating responsibilities are essential. So you need to have your roles clear. Additionally, we need to secure support from the stakeholders in both sectors. For example, environmental organizations and businesses, so you could gather valuable insights on project proposal. Next slide. To maximize the potential of PPPs, local government should focus on improving financial access, incentivizing climate-related investments. PPPs enable government to leverage private sector's expertise and funding, particularly in emerging sectors like climate change. Identifying key areas for collaboration, such as energy efficiency initiatives, renewable can yield significant benefits. In our time, data is power. However, in building resilient communities, data should be used for empowerment. Ultimately, the effectiveness of PPPs hinges on a deep understanding of local context. Local government must ensure that partners and their partnership must align to their goals while considering potential social and environmental impact. Next slide. So in summary, when strategizing for PPPs, it is of utmost importance to ensure that the objectives of the public and private sector are harmonized, for sustained success. This is indispensable for governments contemplating for partnerships, fostering innovation to serve their communities for a long time through cooperative endeavors. So I think this is my last slide. Next. So if you need further details or concern, here's our contact information, and we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for that great presentation from Makati and a city's perspective on how you're putting together the resources and the structures needed to adequately finance your project and infrastructure needs. Okay, let's get straight to some of the questions that we have for our panelists. Francisco, back to you, if I may. Let's sort of take a couple of steps back and actually see what strategies need to be implemented by cities before they actually seek to make applications. So the question is, what are some of the strategies needed by cities to conduct an effective financing needs assessment in cities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clinton. This is a very, very good question, right? And I think it really goes down to what are the steps to ensure that you are developing the right climate projects. As mentioned, developing them is challenging. It's also complex. You need partners for that. So it's very, very important that you're doing the right thing, the thing that makes the most sense to the local reality. And what we have seen over the years is that very important when you are developing projects, when you have this willingness to try to ground your project into some kind of broader strategy or a plan, right? Which we are oftentimes talking about here in this context about the climate plans. So the climate mitigation plan for the city, the climate adaptation plan for the city, this should be the main compass guiding what are the right interventions to the infrastructure that needs to be built so that you can really get to the projects which are the most important for you to achieve your climate goals. Yet, these are not the only kind of plans you should be looking at, right? The cities don't happen in vacuum. They're not only doing climate. So it's quite important also to understand what are the other development plans in place for the cities that you can really ensure that there's consistency, coherence, but also that there's long-term political commitment to what you're doing. We see that political commitment is often one of the main challenges preventing more ambitious projects from taking off. And of course, this will all depend on ensuring that you first have the right data in place, right? It's very important to ensure that we're really able to understand where emissions are coming from, where vulnerability is, the price of land, all different social economic indicators that will help you understand what is the real thing that you need to be doing at the moment. It's also quite important, especially for adaptation projects, to also connect your projects to broader discussions about who is really vulnerable, right, to the impacts of climate change. So doing these kind of maps where you can understand the vulnerability to different kinds of impacts of climate change. But you can also connect this to wider elements, right, of your development plans for the city. And here I like also to call the attention. I think we talked quite a bit about the PPFs and the role, which again is key to unlock finance for urban climate investments worldwide. But we also see that another kind of player that plays a critical role in this task is the city networks, right? These are often institutions that are working very, very closely with the cities themselves. And here I can name a couple like UCLG, of course, here with us today, but also GCOM, ECLA, C40, because these are really the institutions that can help many of the cities develop the capacity, which they often need, to develop these plans, to connect them and to think, okay, how can I go from these broader plans to specific projects that should be developed? And also sometimes they help connect with different PPFs. A similar kind of institution that I also like to call attention here so that our attendants can also take a look at and see what are the opportunities in their locations are the multilateral development banks, right? Oftentimes, the NDBs also play a very important role, especially because they are able to finance this infrastructure later on, sometimes at concessional lower rates than commercial institutions. And many of them are also working very closely with cities, right? We see this more and more, MDBs working with cities to help them develop their strategies, think about different kind of projects. So I would also like to call the attention to them here. I think especially important in Asia, we had the example of CDIA, right? So, I mean, trying to be brief here, Clinton, because that was a very complex question. I could talk about it for ages, but let me know if you'd like me to complement. Otherwise, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. And linked to this need to create the right environment to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your city approach, the team in the chat has put the link to the Enabling Framework Conditions tool that was developed by CCFLA and ESCAP as part of the Urban Act project at the subnational and national level. Next question for Hayo. And you said, Hayo, that C40 CFF is a late stage PPF. So I guess the question then is, if a city is approaching you, say from an earlier stage, looking for the right funding partner, how may they best be supported in the earlier part? And I'm not sure if you could give any examples of other funds that may be able to support those earlier stages of project development. So yeah, just touching on at what stage maybe the application needs to be at before it comes to the C40 CFF, and then if there's an example of a fund that could perhaps support in the earlier stages of project feasibility studies. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot for that question. Very happy to respond to it. Obviously, it's always a challenge to decide which proposal we would support and not, but we are pretty clear, and our funds obviously are limited as well, that a project has to be clearly defined, and there needs to be a clear idea already, and it needs to be defined within the priority of a city, obviously. So we have some examples where we tapped into projects which have previously been supported by other global or regional initiatives. So the City Climate Finance Gap Fund is a good example. So, for instance, the Bombela case in South Africa is a good example where the Gap Fund has provided support in the earlier stage phases, and then we actually took up the project and we support the late stage phase now. We have experiences or examples from programs supported by other bilateral cooperation partnerships, being it through USAID, Germany, UK FCDO as well. And I guess Urban Act here today, so I'm extremely happy to be part of this conversation today. I think Urban Act is a very good example, providing support throughout various phases. I also believe also a little bit more earlier and medium stage. So I think collaboration between Urban Act and CFF might be extremely exciting as well, to support some of the projects, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So there are various initiatives out there. I wouldn't be able to name you like the top 10 now, but City Climate Finance Gap Fund, Urban Act, and of course a lot of projects in a bilateral context in the respective country are always interesting. And yeah, we have some engagement in the Philippines, in India, in Indonesia, Malaysia, and others. Always happy to exchange ideas. So please reach out to us, to our general email, which I have shared, but also to me directly. So always very happy to exchange thoughts and provide guidance as well.
Great. Thank you, Hayo. And I see that the questions are coming in to the Q&A including.
Sorry, I would actually
this-
also like to refer just to Francisco as well, because CCFLA, they have quite a good overview of various PPFs as well. So that's always a good, very insightful reference as well. Thank you.
Indeed, and I'm not sure if the link, Francisco, to the report that was published last year on the guidelines for PPFs is in the chat, but that could be a useful tool for participants to access as well. Joyce, from the Makati point of view, this question was asked in the registration process, but has been asked again in the chat. I'll ask it here. I think you did touch upon this sister city program in your presentation, but the question is, given that Makati is the richest LGU in the Philippines, are there any plans to make available climate finance for other local governments through its sister city program?
Yes, actually, I actually mentioned that a glimpse of that, but we do have plans to actually leverage, make Makati actually like a focal person or focal hub on accessing climate financing, since we already have the partners in place. What we're working on right now is the existing policies on that one, because there's no precedence. So we've talked with ADB regarding this, and they mentioned that they would see how we can do it, because at the moment Makati is restricted with the national laws on doing this type of setup. We also plan to cooperate with I think this is for the People Survivance Fund, and this is under the Department of Finance. That's the national or the Ministry of Finance in the Philippines. So we talked with them because Makati is not eligible for PSF, but we have a discussion with them and a possible collaboration of making Makati like a not a fund manager, but the manager of accessing the PSF and then distributing that fund to other LGUs that needs the funding. But still, it's still under really just an inception and the startup, because there's no policies on that yet. So we need to really review this work and the policy and check the existing policy if it's feasible. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Thank you very much for that answer, Joyce. Francisco, maybe the next one for you. And this question is a common sort of theme throughout the webinar series, and that is if a city has less resources available to them, or if they're a bit smaller in size or struggling to find the right resourcing, financial or otherwise, what's the first thing they can do, and how can they best be supported in the process of developing a viable project? Thank you.
Thank you again, Clinton, for bringing the great questions. I really appreciate it. So, well, that's a very relevant question, right? Because mobilizing climate financing cities is hard, let alone mobilizing this financing in small intermediary cities, right? So what a daunting task. And what we see is that oftentimes it's important to understand things from taking a step back, right? So I think here, referring a bit to the enabling framework conditions tools that you mentioned, I think it can be a very important way for cities to understand how ready they are to mobilize urban climate investment. So in a nutshell, these tools aim to help cities and other kinds of governments to understand how good the policy is, how ready the climate action plans are, a lot about their burden finance systems and possibilities, climate data, vertical and horizontal coordination. And by doing that, they are able to understand how they can improve the overall environment so that they can mobilize more investments to their specific needs. In the case of small and intermediary cities, we see there are three main gaps that relate, or let's say that make the task for them to mobilize finance even harder than if it's a larger city. The first one being that they often have different kinds of capacity and skill gaps. So, well, we're talking here about smaller teams with perhaps not the latest softwares and other kinds of challenges. So I think in this case, we see it's very, very important to understand who can help you fill in these gaps, right? And here again, I'd like to recall the role of the city networks that can really provide this capacity building exercise to the cities, but also the different PPFs, oftentimes a similar job, and even DMDBs. Of course, accessing this support if you're a smaller intermediary city can be harder. That's why it's so important to really work with your enabling framework conditions tools, dimensions, to really ensure that you are able to have everything that you need to tap into this support, right? So this means, for example, having your policies aligned, national policies aligned with your local policies, your ambition reflected in the NDCs, so that it really can show that you are ready, right, to do all this. We also see that one of the challenges that these kind of cities have relates to the size of the project, right? Oftentimes the infrastructure needed in these cities is smaller just because the cities are smaller, right? So if you, for example, need to change your bus fleet, and you're talking about a larger city, you have more buses to change or electric versions, which means that your project has a larger ticket size, which can be quite attractive to investors. Small intermediary cities often don't have this opportunity. So in this case, recommend them to try to aggregate projects, right? So that they can bundle different opportunities together to really ensure that you're able to reach a ticket size that can be interesting, for example, to an NDB or to a private investor. And finally, a last point concerning small intermediary cities that we see is that they often have credit worthiness issues that makes it hard for them to be able to enter the debt market. So in this case, we suggest first trying to understand where your insufficient credit worthiness is coming from so that you can tackle these the root causes, but also to perhaps be looking at more innovative financial instruments. And here again, I'd like to invite you to take a look at our website in our financial instruments toolkit, where you can learn more about different financial instruments available to cities, including many of them that don't require debt, and for instance, can be an interesting solution for cities that cannot really enter the borrowing market. Thank you. Over, Clinton.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for that wonderful answer and how smaller cities may be able to best be supported. Hi all, there's a question for you in the Q&A. Can you explain a little more on the waste project from Accra, Ghana? Is it a financial readiness project?
That's a very good question. And besides adaptation, waste-related projects are the most complex and complicated ones in terms of reaching finance readiness. But yes, it is a link to finance projects. It's pretty detailed. I'm very happy to share a project description after this one. But it's a waste-related project, which is part of the city priority agenda on waste. It is actually also linked to other waste-related programs, specifically World Bank funded waste-related programs in the same vicinity of Accra, and it's close to the ocean, so ocean plastic plays quite a critical role as well. But it's actually a very complex project, so bear with me, whoever asked this question. I'm very happy to respond just after the meeting, but I think, yeah, we're just against the time, so happy to do a bilateral exchange on that one.
Thank you very much.
Maybe just as a footnote as well, waste is a growing sector. I mean, it's difficult to call it a sector actually, but waste and circular economy is definitely a growing area, which we also see actually from other initiatives. So in Asia, it's a growing area. In Sub-Saharan Africa, very big sector actually growing, but also in countries like Brazil, waste and circular economy are actually high on the priority agenda. We expect more waste-related projects in our next phase as well.
Indeed, waste management always a topic, an area of work in great demand from governments of all different sizes. The final question for Joyce, because we are out of time. Joyce, has Makati conducted its own needs assessment of its climate finance capacities? So essentially, has Makati gone through a process and how of self-diagnosing or self-assessing its capacity to access climate-ready projects?
Yes, actually, we do. We did actually for quite a few of the existing, like the Green Readiness Fund and then the PSF, as I mentioned earlier. That's why we already know that it's actually very difficult and very time-consuming to actually submit all these documents and requirements to access this funding. So we actually did that one, and we also is still considering accessing this PPFs. That's why we are actually communicating with different development banks as well, like the ADB, and we're actually also looking into accessing TAP of ICLEI, because I think Mayor Abby is the portfolio holder of the innovative financing. So we're looking into using TAP also as a platform to help us in navigating the complexities of accessing funding of international funding. One main consideration for local governments on that one is actually if they are even allowed to access the funding, because in some cases it's the national government funding that is allowed to do it. So for that question, the answer is yes.
Great. I think it's very useful that we have you here to give us that city-led perspective. So that, unfortunately, participants, is all the time that we have today. I'd like to give a very big round of thank yous to our three expert panelists, Mr. Francisco Macedo from CCFLA, Mr. Hayo Juncker from the C40 Cities Finance Facility, and Joyce C. from Makati City Government, who have all done a fantastic job in demonstrating and showcasing their expertise in the topic. We certainly hope that it was useful and you're able to make some connections from this webinar, which may help you to assist your city in gaining access to climate finance and climate-ready projects. So thank you very much once again. The presentations and materials from the webinar will be made available. The recording, as I said, will be on YouTube. I'm pleased to invite you to our next webinar, Friday, the 18th of October, which is part of the ESCAP Committee for Environment and Development 8 program. And the title of that webinar is Action for Low Carbon Cities, New Paradigms of Energy Efficiency, Transportation, and Urban Infrastructure Planning. Once again, this webinar is part of the Urban Act project, generously supported by the International Climate Initiative of the German government. As you'll see on the screen, there's a QR code for you to fill out a feedback survey, which you will need to do so in case you wish to get a certificate of participation from the webinar. So the feedback QR code is right there on the screen. Apart from that, I believe I have said I need all I have to say in closing this Urban Act webinar. It's been a pleasure. Certainly look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar on Friday, the 18th of October. Thank you very much, panelists, attendees, participants. I wish you a fantastic rest of the day, and please welcome to the next webinar next month. Thank you very much.